The NFL New Year officially began on Wednesday, March 14th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Free agency is basically the first thing that happens during the new league year. And then we got the NFL draft coming up at the end of April. It'll be from April 26th to April 28th this year in Arlington, Texas at Cowboys Stadium. As I said, free agency is basically the first thing that occurs during the new league year. This year, a lot of teams went out and agreed to contracts with players who are free agents because they were either released or their contract came to an end and their previous team decided not to renew that. So that's why they're free agents. A lot of deals have gone down so far. I'm going to go through every single key transaction that has happened up to this point and go through every single NFL team. All 32 teams are accounted for today. So, as I said, free agency, fun time, and then you got the NFL draft coming up at the end of April. The draft, they're moving it to Dallas this year. Last year was in Philly. The 2 years before that, it was in Chicago, and then I think for 75 years in a row before that, I know for a fact, 75 years might not be the correct number. Might be a little bit less, might be a little bit more. I'm not exactly sure on that, but every single year before that, it was held. And where it should be held at every single year, in my opinion, is Radio City Music Hall in New York City. But if the NFL wants to move the draft around, like how the NHL does it, arena to arena for each respective city that has a team in the league, then they have the right to do that. And it does give the opportunity to fans to attend the draft if they live close to the area rather than traveling to New York City year in and year out as most fans did for however long. But so free agency, the draft, so I'm going to go through every single team and every single key transaction that I think is important. But first, before I do, make sure, if you haven't done so already, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. All the links are in the description below. I will remind you probably at the end of the show if I don't forget. I always try to. So, as I said, just scroll down. All the links are in the description below. So, if you haven't liked, followed, and subscribed, be sure to go do so. Teams that have new coaches and front office executives are in the process of trying to get their teams in order. So as I said, players that are free agents and those coaches and front office people think that player can contribute to the team next season, they'll offer him a deal. That player can obviously accept it or decline it. And players nowadays, they'll go on visits. They'll go on a short little trip. Say they're going to visit 3 teams out west and a team in the Midwest. And they played on the East Coast. They'll probably hit Chicago first, then go to Seattle, and then say Arizona or LA. And then after that, they'll decide where they want to play at and what deal is the right one for them. Some players are in it for the money. Some players want to go win a Super Bowl. Whatever floats their boat. It is what it is when it comes down to it. To me, it's not about money. I would want to go somewhere that I can contribute to right away and have the possibility of making the playoffs every single year of that contract and go play in the Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl championship. But teams right now, they're in the middle of doing all that, and as I said, have had a lot of signings so far. So that's why I took a couple days after free agency began, kind of went through everything, like I said, and figured out what I thought were the best deals and who won and lost free agency. And as I said, I'm going to go through every single NFL team. All 32 teams were accounted for. New head coaches. I want to get this in real quick before I do start. New head coaches. I don't know. Can't remember. It's been a while. Since I last made a football video. Last video I made was a wrestling video. I believe the last football one was previewing Super Bowl 52, which saw the Philadelphia Eagles defeat the New England Patriots in Minneapolis by a score of 41-33. But new head coaches, I don't think I said either in that video or even the video before that, all the new head coaches in the league this upcoming year. The Cardinals hired Steve Wilkes, the Bears hired Matt Nagy, the Lions hired Matt Patricia, the Colts hired Frank Reich, the Giants hired Pat Shurmur, the Titans brought over Mike Vrabel from Houston, and the Raiders brought back old Chucky, John Gruden. And as I said, first thing these teams will go through is, is there some sort of connection? Does this player or is this player, going to fit in this system? And once they figure out the money situation, then they'll offer them a contract. What do I have next? Franchise tags, other than free agency, is the first thing that happens, and it happens at the end of the last year. About a month before. I'm trying to explain it. About a month before free agency starts, the last year of the last month of the last year of last season. Try to spit it out. But five teams, including the Dallas Cowboys, Detroit Lions, Miami Dolphins, Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Los Angeles Rams, placed franchise tags on DeMarcus Lawrence, Ezekiel Ansah, Jarvis Landry, Le'Veon Bell, and LaMarcus Joyner, respectively. However, the Miami Dolphins then traded Jarvis Landry to the Cleveland Browns. I'm sure you saw it. So now the Browns have to figure out if they want to have him play under the franchise tag for this season or try to sign him to a long-term deal before July the 16th, which that is the cutoff for the franchise tag to sign a player to a long-term deal if he is under the franchise tag. And then the scouting combine happens. All the combine is all these coaches, execs, scouts. They head to Indianapolis, Indiana, where it's been held for the past 32 years, I believe. And they watch players work out, and they also interview those players so they can get a feel of, if they want to draft this player in the draft, or if they don't, they can look, at free agency then and sign whatever player they need for that position, or if that player fits their scheme. And then pro days, they're going on at the moment, and they'll be going on up until the draft. All the pro day is the same thing as the combine. The players are going to be working out and interviewing for teams, and then the teams can bring in, if they want to, whatever player they want to their facility, interview them and have them work out there, and then they'll get a better view of that player up close in person. But main event of the NFL offseason is free agency and the NFL draft. And then after that, you have OTAs and training camp will start. And then, like I said before, we know it, the 2018-19 NFL season will be here. Preseason will be starting in August. Got the Hall of Fame game, got Hall of Fame weekend. Got a great Hall of Fame class this year. And then about 4 weeks later, about a month later, the new league year, the regular season will begin. And the Philadelphia Eagles, the schedules aren't out yet. The Philadelphia Eagles will open the season at home because they won the Super Bowl last year. Normally, every single year, whoever wins the Super Bowl will open the season at home. The one I can remember in recent years, the team that did not open the season at home after winning the Super Bowl was the Baltimore Ravens after they won Super Bowl 47. Because, well, the Baltimore Orioles were playing a home game also that night, and both teams shared parking lots, so there was not enough parking for both events, both baseball and football game. So the Baltimore Ravens then had to play out in Denver, and that's the game that Peyton Manning went off and threw like 70,000 touchdowns against their defense. But as I said, a bit different this year for free agency. A lot of teams agreed to deals with players before free agency even started. But, you know, I guess when it comes down to it, it is, you know, probably better. But then at the same point, you gotta, like, once it actually starts, then somebody can still back out, and then, you know, like, you gotta have a plan B. It is what it is when it comes down to it. But I'm more old-fashioned, old school. You know, I'd like them to be free agents up until, like, you can't do anything up until 4 p.m. On the day of the new league year, and then after that you can talk to people and you know, figure out a deal, and then if you want to sign there. But been talking long enough already, so I'm going to get into it. I'll start with the Arizona Cardinals. They released Adrian Peterson. That's understandable. I think David Johnson's coming back from his ACL injury that he injured early in the season last year. I believe it was week 1 or week 2. I know I was mad about that because I had him in fantasy football last year, and my fantasy football season went down the drain. Hopefully Peterson signs somewhere where, you know, he can get back to the old school Adrian Peterson that we all know, the Adrian Peterson from, say, 2007 to 2012. Because after that, you know, he got into some trouble, and then signed with the Saints last year in free agency, and then they traded him at the deadline to the Cardinals because David Johnson was injured. Bruce Arians is out now. David Johnson's coming back. So, like I said, it's understandable that the Cardinals released Adrian Peterson. The Cardinals also released the Honey Badger Tyrann Mathieu, who I'll get to here in a little bit. The Cardinals did sign a former teammate of Adrian Peterson, Sam Bradford, to a 1-year deal worth $20 million with $15 million in guarantees. And they also brought in Mike Glennon from another NFC North team, the Chicago Bears, to back up Sam Bradford. Bradford gets hurt, Mike Glennon's going to be the guy in Arizona. We all have seen how Sam Bradford's career has been up to this point. He's made almost $140 million, and I don't even think he's played maybe 3 or 4 full seasons. And he's been in the league almost 10 years. So, you know, what's that saying? They also brought in Cincinnati Bengals tackle Andre Smith, the former Alabama Crimson Tide, teammate of A.J. McCarron, who I'll get to here in a little bit as well. He left the Cincinnati Bengals. But David Johnson's back. Carson Palmer retired. They released Adrian Peterson. So they bring in. They also released Tyrann Mathieu, as I said, but they bring in Sam Bradford, Mike Glennon, and Andre Smith to block for both Bradford and David Johnson, or Mike Glennon, as I said, if Sam Bradford gets injured again. The Atlanta Falcons, then, their team is pretty much still intact from the past 2 seasons. So, I mean, they did lose Taylor Gabriel, who I'll get to here in a minute as well. So the Falcons, up to this point, really haven't done anything. You know, why fix it if it's not broken? They did, however, I have written down here, sign guard Brandon Fusco from, he played last year with the San Francisco 49ers after spending his first 6 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. He's a Slippery Rock grad from right down the road. And then they also re-signed kicker Matt Bryant to a 3-year deal. And Bryant, who's been with the Falcons since 2009, will turn 43 in May, and only Phil Dawson and Adam Vinatieri are older. And so they're the oldest 3 guys in the league. And they're all kickers. So if you want to play in the NFL a long time, be a kicker. The Baltimore Ravens, And if you can't tell, I'm going to be going in alphabetical order. So if you like the Washington Redskins, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait until the end of the show. Just like the Falcons, the Baltimore Ravens, up to this point, haven't done a whole lot in free agency. They released cornerback Ladarius Webb, running back Danny Woodhead, who decided to retire after 10 seasons, and Jeremy Maclin, who they signed from Kansas City last year. And, he only played 1 year in Baltimore, really didn't work out. He was hurt a lot. So to replace him, they brought in wide receivers John Brown and Ryan Grant, but Ryan Grant failed his physical, so that deal is off the table. They'll obviously have to work out a new deal, or he'll sign somewhere else and then try to pass the physical again. Who knows why he failed the physical. But they brought in another weapon, though, for Joe Flacco to replace Ryan Grant since he failed his physical, along with John Brown. And they brought in wide receiver Michael Crabtree from the Oakland Raiders after the Raiders released him, and Crabtree ended up signing a 3-year deal with the Baltimore Ravens. So the Baltimore Ravens, they have a decent offensive line. Running back situation can be, boosted a little bit. Alex Collins came on late in the year last year. Joe Flacco, is he elite or not? He is a Super Bowl winning quarterback, though. And he'll probably be in Baltimore the rest of his career. They got John Brown now at wide receiver. Mike Wallace is still there. Bring in Michael Crabtree. They also have Brashard Perriman, who they drafted in the first round a couple years ago out of University of Central Florida, who has been injured most of his career. So they got a lot of weapons for Joe Flacco if they can play some good defense and stop the other team from scoring. The Baltimore Ravens might be onto something, and they might make the playoffs again this year. We'll have to see. John Harbaugh, I'm actually, as I said before, I'm surprised. Excuse me. I'm surprised he's still there. I'm surprised they didn't fire him after the end of last year, just because they haven't made the playoffs, I believe, in 3 or 4 years. But if they can get everything figured out and win some games, like I said, it'd be nice to see the Ravens in the playoffs, even though I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Because if they do make the playoffs, it'd be nice to have the Steelers also in the playoffs and have that matchup and then have the best team win. The Buffalo Bills, then, the team that made the playoffs last year because the Cincinnati Bengals defeated the Baltimore Ravens in Week 17, if you remember that. They have been one of the most active teams so far in free agency. They signed Vontae Davis, longtime NFL cornerback, brother of Vernon Davis, whose career might be over. We'll have to see what his situation is. Who else did they sign? They signed running back Chris Ivory from Jacksonville after he was released from the Jaguars, and he will serve as LaShawn McCoy's backup. Or if Shady gets hurt again, plug in Chris Ivory. He'll give you some good carries. They also brought back longtime defensive tackle Kyle Williams, who's been with the Buffalo Bills since being drafted by them in 2006 out of LSU. Brought Trenton Murphy from Washington, and I'll just say Star, because I know I'm gonna mess up his last name. The defensive tackle from the Carolina Panthers, who decided to leave Carolina after spending his first 4 or 5 years with the Panthers after getting drafted by them out of Utah. And now with those signings and bringing back Kyle Williams, you could argue that the Bills have one of the best front fours in the NFL at the moment. Bearing any injuries to those guys during the season, we'll have to see about that then. And then the last thing the Bills did, talk about Andre Smith, the former Alabama Crimson Tide teammate of A.J. McCarron. A.J. McCarron left Cincinnati, so Cincinnati's going to be looking for a new backup now for Andy Dalton. A.J. McCarron left Cincinnati because the Bills traded Tyrod Taylor to the Browns. I'll get to that here in a minute when I talk about the Browns. So the Bills needed a quarterback. They signed A.J. McCarron to a 2-year deal. I do like the signing for McCarron because it's only for 2 years. You can get out of it even after next year if he doesn't play well, if you draft somebody in the draft, which more than likely they will, because now they have the 12th and 22nd picks in the first round, unlike the 21st and 22nd picks. They have 2 first-round picks because they made a trade with the Kansas City Chiefs last year. And if you remember, both the Chiefs and the Bills made the playoffs, so that's why they had 21st and 22nd picks in the first round this year in the draft. But they made a trade with the Bengals before McCarron signed. They traded tackle Cordy Glenn to Cincinnati, so Glenn's going to replace Andre Smith, who signed in Arizona. See all the pieces that I'm connecting? The Bills traded Cordy Glenn. They're swapping first-round picks. Other picks are involved as well. So now the Bills have the 12th and 22nd. Big news earlier today as well. The Jets traded up from 6 to 3 with the Colts. So the Jets are going to be picking third now, more than likely going to take a quarterback. We'll have to see. And then the Colts had the 6th, and then they got 3 second-round picks from the Jets as well. We'll get to that when I talk about the Jets. But now the Bills have the 12th and 22nd, so take a quarterback at 12 or 22. And if A.J. McCarron doesn't work out, you start whoever you draft next year and get rid of McCarron. Like I said, you can get out of it whenever, because it's only for 2 years. It's not for a lot of money. And we'll have to see what happens. It's this type of deal has happened in the past, although it was for a longer and a larger amount. Brock Osweiler, when he left Denver to go to Houston, and then it was last year, the Texans traded him to the Browns, and then the Browns ended up trading him back to Denver, so Denver ended up getting him back. Now he's a free agent again. Who knows if his career is over? He'll probably be a backup somewhere, but yeah, I've liked what the Buffalo Bills have done so far up to this point in free agency. The Carolina Panthers, then, as I said, they lost their defense tackle. I'm just going to say Star because I know I'm going to mess up his last name, so don't get mad at me for that. But the Panthers, they released 3 veterans and losing Star, who have contributed a lot during their time in Charlotte. They released safety Kirk Coleman, defensive end Charles Johnson, and running back Jonathan Stewart. However, they did trade for Torrey Smith, wide receiver Torrey Smith from Philadelphia. So Torrey Smith comes in, going to compete for that number 1 wide receiver job. Devin Funchess was basically the number 1 guy in Carolina after they traded Kelvin Benjamin to Buffalo last year at the trade deadline. But now they trade for Torrey Smith, but it cost them a 2-year starter at cornerback Darryl Worley, who they drafted out of West Virginia a couple years ago. But to make fans happy in the end, they re-signed kicker Graham Gano and longtime defensive end Julius Peppers, who will be coming back for his 17th season. And then to replace Star, they signed on Terry Poe away from division rival Atlanta. Poe comes to Carolina, comes to Charlotte after 5 years in Kansas City and last year in Atlanta. He was in the same deal this year as what he was last year, signing with a new team in free agency. The Chicago Bears, then, our next new head coach, Matt Nagy, was instrumental, I thought, in helping the Bears sign some young assets that will hopefully contribute right away. Last year in the draft, head coach John Fox signed, well, drafted, not signed. The Bears were active a little bit last year in free agency as well. They signed some guys, but John Fox drafted Mitch Trubisky. Remember, they traded up from 3 to 2 with the San Francisco 49ers. And that was after they signed Mike Glennon to a 3-year, $45 million deal. Fast forward to now, Mike Glennon's obviously in Arizona because the Bears cut him. Trubisky's obviously the guy. So they needed a backup quarterback. They brought in longtime backup Chase Daniel to back up Trubisky if anything happens. But as I said, Matt Nagy was instrumental, I thought, in bringing some key assets to Chi-Town when they signed wide receiver Allen Robinson and wide receiver Taylor Gabriel and Super Bowl hero, the tight end Trey Burton from the Philadelphia Eagles. Trey Burton threw the pass to Nick Foles in what we now know as the Philly Special. Trubisky now has a number one wide receiver in Allen Robinson. Taylor Gabriel will more than likely be the 2 or the slot. To go along with a two-headed backfield with Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen. And if their defense, well, if the team in general can figure out how to play actual football, not backyard football, actual football, the Bears might be on to something, and the Bears might be winning games sooner than later. They also re-signed wide receivers Josh Bellamy from last year's squad and Cameron Meredith, along with longtime cornerback Prince Amukamara. The Cincinnati Bengals then, as I said, they lost A.J. McCarron, made a trade with the Bills, brought in Cordy Glenn because they lost Andre Smith to Arizona. But other than that, they've barely done a damn thing. But you know, they were playing good there late in the year last year, so you know, why fix it if it's not broken? So if they don't want to make any moves, you know, then so be it. There's a lot of teams though that, and I'll say this, there's a lot of teams though that, you know, don't really do a whole lot during free agency because it costs more money than going out and drafting guys. Because then if you draft guys, you know that contract's going to be smaller, and it, you know, might be over a longer period of time. And especially if you're a new head coach or a coach that you know, has been only been coaching for a couple years, you know, drafting a guy, you'll have him for 4 or 5 years. You'll have 4 or 5 years and you know, get something figured out and go to the playoffs and try to win a Super Bowl before your ass gets fired. But it's all right that in my opinion, that the Bengals really didn't do a whole lot up to this point in free agency. The other team, though, in the Buckeye State, the Cleveland Browns, the team that's a little bit northeast of Cincinnati, they basically have won the offseason so far. But they're the Browns, so they still could fuck it up. We'll have to wait and see on that. That's still to be seen. Because, you know, in recent years, you know, they've done this before, but then they still make the stupid bonehead decisions. And then they still finish 0-16 like they did last year and became the second only team in NFL history to finish 0-16. The Detroit Lions in 2008 and then the 2017 Cleveland Browns. But the first thing the Browns did, they traded for Miami Dolphins wide receiver Jarvis Landry. Then they traded for Buffalo Bills quarterback Tyrod Taylor. So a new quarterback and wide receiver in Cleveland at the moment. But then when you thought they were done, including me, they're, you know, getting their ammo reloaded and, you know, discussing other deals with other teams. They ended up trading quarterback Deshaun Kaiser since they didn't need him then, since they got Tyrod Taylor. They shipped him off to Green Bay. They got cornerback Demarius Randall to help out on the defense, and they also got some picks as well. They did, however, during this offseason, lose, and just a couple of days ago, lose future first ballot Hall of Famer offensive tackle Joe Thomas, who has played his whole 11-year career in Cleveland after getting drafted in the top 5 out of Wisconsin in 2007. Now, you know, how do you replace him? You know, yeah, it's going to be hard. As I said, Joe Thomas more than likely a future first ballot Hall of Famer. But they signed Chris Hubbard away from division rival Pittsburgh to a 5-year deal. Hubbard been a backup basically his whole career in Pittsburgh, but you know, I think he'd be a good starter and good fit for now in Cleveland to replace Joe Thomas. They also lost Isaiah Crowell. He decided to sign with the Jets. I'll get to that when I talk about the Jets as well. But when they lost him, they decided to bring in a former Buckeye, Ohio State running back, Carlos Hyde. played his whole career with the San Francisco 49ers, former first-round pick. When I talk about the 49ers as well, they found a replacement for him. Could take a running back in this year's draft. A lot of teams, I think, are going to be taking running backs that they think could start one day or could start right off the bat, because there's a lot of running backs in this year's NFL draft class. So they brought in Jarvis Landry at wide receiver, Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, Carlos Hyde at running back. They lost Joe Thomas, obviously that's a big blow. Brought in Chris Hubbard to replace him, got Demarius Randall from Green Bay. And by the way, they also hold the number 1 and number 4 picks in the draft this year. Number 1 is their own because they finished 0-16, but 4 is from Houston because the Browns and the Texans made a trade on draft night last year when the Texans traded up to draft Deshaun Watson. And then they also got, last thing I have written down here in my notes, they also got more draft picks, which, you know, can help. And this year it ended up helping them a lot because they've been saving these draft picks for a while. They've done it in recent years. But if you have too many draft picks, you're going to have to get rid of them, because if you use them all, you're going to have too many players. You're going to have to cut the guys that you drafted anyway. So that's why they ended up getting Tyrod Taylor and Jarvis Landry, because they had some ammunition to get rid of. But the last thing I have written down, like I said, they got more draft picks because they traded defensive tackle Danny Shelton to the New England Patriots, along with Jason McCourty, who is going to be reuniting with his twin brother, also in New England. Separate trades, different days, but the Cleveland Browns, up to this point, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions, have won free agency. The Dallas Cowboys then, to go along with the Cincinnati Bengals, have done absolutely nothing. They didn't even make a trade, so they've done a little bit less than the Bengals. But they did rework center Zach Martin's contract to save some money, and they might be doing the same with wide receiver Dez Bryant. We'll have to see about that. And then I also have written down here, and I didn't take it out of my notes, Deion Sanders wanted the Cowboys to sign Tyrann Mathieu because he was released by the Arizona Cardinals, as I said. But late last night, the Houston Texans decided to sign Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, to a 1-year, $7 million deal, and I'll get to that when I talk about the Houston Texans. But the Cowboys, you know, when it comes down to it, they're not really surprising me, as in recent years, they've built their team through the NFL draft, and it looks like they'll be doing the same again this year. The Denver Broncos then, they've been looking for the right answer at quarterback ever since Peyton Manning retired after winning the Broncos Super Bowl 50. They lost Brock Osweiler at free agency 2 years ago, as I said, to Houston. He got traded to Cleveland because Houston didn't want him anymore because he sucks. And then the Broncos ended up getting him back in a deal with Cleveland back in the preseason last year. But after they lost Osweiler, they drafted Paxton Lynch out of Memphis. He really hasn't worked out because he's been hurt, or when he's played, he really hasn't played well. And then they have also had Trevor Siemian, but they just dished him off to Minnesota in a trade for draft picks. Because, well, I think when it came down to it, John Elway knew Trevor Siemian wasn't going to be the future of the Denver Broncos, because the Broncos hold, I believe it's the 5th overall pick in this year's draft. They were in the Kirk Cousins sweepstakes, but they decided to get out of it because it was going to be too much money, and they knew they could use that money to space it out and go out and sign other players that they knew could fit in their system for years to come. So they decided to sign Case Keenum, who arguably had the best year of his career this past year, when he filled in Minnesota for the injured Teddy Bridgewater and Sam Bradford. And by the way, all three of those quarterbacks are not in Minnesota anymore. And when I get to the Vikings, I'll talk about that. Like I said, John Elway knew, I think he knew, Siemian wasn't the answer. probably going to take a quarterback in the first round this year. But, go out and sign a guy who I guess you could compare to Brock Osweiler, because he did get not as long a deal, but he did get a lot of money. I believe it was a 2-year, $36 million deal for Case Keenum in Denver. Brock Osweiler's deal was like a 5-year, $170 million, or $72 million, excuse me. I think it was 172. But for a guy who really, Keenum did more, I would agree on that. I would say that. But, you do see it all the time that teams will bring in veterans to help with the rookie quarterback or a younger quarterback who they think could be the future. And, that's basically what the Denver Broncos are doing at the moment by bringing in Case Keenum on a 2-year deal. And, same thing with him as with A.J. McCarron. You want to get out after 2 years? You can do that. So, the thing with Keenum, he's in it for more money. So the Broncos might be screwed there a little bit. But what else do I have down here for the Denver Broncos as they're trying to get back on track? They got some more draft picks. They traded Aqib Talib, their cornerback, to the Los Angeles Rams. And when I talk about the LA Rams, I'll talk about the other moves that they did as well to help out that defense. The Detroit Lions, they have a first-time head coach in Matt Patricia. We'll have to see how that, plays out. Sometimes first-time head coaches work and they'll have success, and then sometimes, they'll be fired after 2 or 3 years. We'll just have to see how it plays out. Only time's going to tell. The Lions, a lot like the Cowboys and the Bengals, really haven't done a whole lot. They did release former first-round tight end Eric Ebron, who basically was just taking up space, in my opinion. And if he landed on Mars, signed a contract with Mars, I don't think anybody would give a damn because ever since he was drafted, he absolutely did not do a damn thing with the Lions. Like I said, all he did was take up space, in my opinion. Maybe if you're a Lions fan, maybe you have a different opinion on that. But Patricia, he comes from the Bill Belichick coaching tree. So they'll probably, build their team through the draft and, sign some guys that nobody's heard of. Somebody who's, currently working at, like, Best Buy or, Walmart. But I do have a last-minute addition to the Detroit Lions, though, and it does have a connection with the New England Patriots. They brought in running back LeGarrette Blount and signed him. I believe it was a 1-year deal. It might be a 2-year deal. I'm not exactly sure on that. As I said, it was a last-minute addition to this. Wasn't planning on putting it in here because he wasn't a member of the Detroit Lions whenever I had went through and previewed all this. But they signed LeGarrette Blount. Blount, 2 years ago, played for the New England Patriots for a couple years after he got... he's been all over the league. Played for the Bucs, played for the Patriots, Eagles, Lions, Steelers. Last year he was in Philly. The year before that, and a couple years before that, he was with the Patriots. So that's the connection there with Matt Patricia and LeGarrette Blount. And they do need a running back. Amir Abdullah really hasn't been good for the Lions as well, coming out of Nebraska a couple years ago. But Blount should be a every down, at least the first 2 downs type of back. And then Abdullah can be the 3rd down back. But we'll have to see what they decide to do. Patricia did keep some of the coaching staff from last year, and Jim Bob Cooter will be coming back as the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. So we'll have to see. Maybe the Lions will make the playoffs the first time in a couple years. I've only seen the Lions in the playoffs, I believe, once in my lifetime. It'd be nice to see some different teams in the playoffs, and especially in the Super Bowl. Where to next? Another team in the NFC North, the Green Bay Packers. a team who has basically owned that division in recent years, except for last year because Aaron Rodgers went down with an injury. And Brett Hundley, the backup quarterback, who, will either be cut at training camp or traded, hopefully, or not hopefully, sometime soon, because they got Deshaun Kaiser now, as I said, from Cleveland. But the Packers, they released a fan favorite, but they brought in a guy who really, could be better in the long run. They released wide receiver Jordy Nelson, who has played 10 years in Green Bay. And then they signed Jimmy Graham from the Seattle Seahawks to a 3-year deal. And they also signed Muhammad Wilkerson from the Jets to fill the hole on the defensive line. So, you get rid of Jordy Nelson, save some money, and then use that money to go out and sign Jimmy Graham and Muhammad Wilkerson, respectively. As I said, in the long run, it's probably going to be better that they release Jordy Nelson. Maybe they can bring him back in a couple years. Who knows? But it's probably better that they released him, brought in Jimmy Graham, who, and especially with Jordy Nelson's injuries in the past couple years, probably better that they brought in Jimmy Graham, who is probably going to be better with Aaron Rodgers than what Jordy Nelson ever was. But that's still left to be seen. Probably, he fits better in the system in general. Mike McCarthy, wherever McCarthy would be, and whoever his quarterback would be, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Case Keenum, trying to think of an average quarterback. But we'll have to see how this all plays out, because it's either gonna probably make Mike McCarthy even more legendary in Green Bay, or it's gonna get his ass fired. But the Packers, they got a new GM. He has ties to the Seahawks, so we'll have to see, because normally in free agency they really don't do a whole lot, and then this year they go out and sign 2 big names, and we'll have to see how it plays out. And then, as I said, they traded Demarius Randall to Cleveland for Deshaun Kaiser, so Kaiser's going to be backing up Aaron Rodgers, and Brett Hundley's still there as well, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see if they decide to release him or cut him, before the season starts. The Houston Texans, then, I know I said I would get to Tyrann Mathieu when I talked about the Texans. They signed him to a 1-year deal, 1-year, $7 million deal, after he was released by the Arizona Cardinals. J.J. Watt and a lot of other players from other teams, were calling for their respective team, to go out and sign them. And the Texans won that sweepstakes. But good AFC South, because I got the Texans, the Colts, and the Jaguars coming up. The Texans basically have stuck to the defensive side of the ball. They did claim Sammy Coates, wide receiver Sammy Coates, off of waivers from Cleveland. They didn't sign him to a deal. They claimed him off waivers, so he's a member of the Houston Texans. But the Texans have stuck to the defensive side. They brought back cornerback Jonathan Joseph on a 2-year deal. They brought over cornerback Aaron Colvin from division rival Jacksonville and signed him to a 4-year deal. And then they brought in cornerback Jason Beta-Mosi from New England. The connection with Bill O'Brien and the New England Patriots probably had something to do with it. And Beta-Mosi, he's a cornerback, but he'll probably play more on special teams, because that's how he made his mark in New England with the Patriots. And then, to make fans happy as well, they brought back Shane Leckler on a 1-year deal, and he'll be entering his 18th season at the start of the new season. The Indianapolis Colts, then, they brought back another old player currently in the league. They brought back kicker Adam Vinatieri on a 1-year deal. But other than that, they really haven't done a whole lot. Like I said, earlier today, they traded the number 3 pick to the Jets for the number 6 pick, and they also got 3 second-round picks in return as well. So, new head coach Frank Reich, looks like they're going to be building their team through the draft. Who's next? Jaguars, yeah. Jaguars next. And then I got the Kansas City Chiefs and both Los Angeles teams, the Chargers and the Rams. The Jaguars, they lost 3 players from the past couple years who have contributed a lot during their time in Jacksonville. Linebacker Paul Postlesny retired. Wish you the best, Paws. Former Penn State linebacker, great Penn State linebacker, one of the best of all time. And they also lost former Penn State wide receiver Allen Robinson to the Chicago Bears, as I talked about. And like I just said, too, cornerback Aaron Colvin left the Jags to go to the Texans. However, they did re-sign quarterback Blake Bortles to a 3-year deal worth, I believe it was $54 million. So, with him arguably as well having the best year of his career last year, we'll have to see if that, was a good move or a bad move signing him to a 3-year deal, because they could draft a quarterback this year in the draft, but it'd be late in the first round because they made the AFC Championship game. So it'd probably be best that they did re-sign him. And, like I said, we'll just have to see how it plays out, though. What else do I have? They lost Allen Robinson, but they brought back another wide receiver from the 2014 draft class, Marquise Lee from USC. They brought him back on a 4-year deal. He'll arguably be the number one wide receiver in Jacksonville. And Dante Moncrief, who they signed from the Colts, will be number 2. And then they brought back, they did bring Austin Seferian-Jenkins back to the Sunshine State. He played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a while and was with the Jets last year. But, so they made some good moves, to help out Bortles. They got him some weapons, bring back Marquise Lee after losing Allen Robinson, as I said, and bring in Dante Moncrief and Austin Seferian-Jenkins. And then, the defense, they lost Aaron Colvin and Paul Postlesny, but I think everything's going to be all right down there in Saxonville next year. And, it'd be nice to see the Jaguars back in the playoffs. The Kansas City Chiefs then are next. The Chiefs, they made a blockbuster trade with the Washington Redskins. They traded their quarterback, Alex Smith, to the Redskins for cornerback Kendall Fuller and a 3rd-round pick in this year's draft. A lot of these picks in these deals, they're either for this year, next year, or in 2020. The Redskins then signed Alex Smith to a 4-year extension worth $94 million, with 71 of that guaranteed. Great move for both teams, I thought. Smith, the Chiefs drafted Smith's successor in Patrick Mahomes last year out of Texas Tech. A lot of people say he reminds them of the gunslinger, the first ballot Hall of Famer Brett Favre. We'll have to see, if that's accurate or not, because he hasn't played it down in the NFL yet. But good move for the Redskins as well, just because, and I'll talk about it a little bit more when I talk about the Redskins probably. Good move for the Redskins because, for 3 straight years, almost 3 straight years, this would have been the 3rd straight year that they would have had to place the franchise tag on Kirk Cousins. Or, try to sign him to a long-term deal, and we've seen, that they couldn't in the past. So, and they knew, other teams were going to be offering Cousins fully guaranteed contracts, and that's what he ended up getting. I'll get to him in a minute. So it's best that the Redskins get a good quarterback. Alex Smith's a good quarterback. Former number 1 overall pick out of Utah to San Francisco back in 2005. And he was all right when he was there, but they sucked until Jim Harbaugh came to town. And then he ended up losing his job to Colin Kaepernick. But, you look at it now, Kaepernick's not even playing, doesn't even have a job, and Smith just signed a 4-year deal worth $94 million. So I think who won that, but, you lose Kirk Cousins, it's a huge blow. Bring in Alex Smith, and, you get some draft picks. I think the Chiefs won. I think they probably tied in winning, this trade, because the Chiefs already had, his successor in Mahomes waiting, and the Redskins, they knew they weren't going to be able to re-sign Cousins, so they get Alex Smith, and then with the addition of Kendall Fuller, they didn't need Marcus Peters at cornerback, so they shipped him off to L.A. to the Rams. I'll get to the Rams here in a minute, because they also got Aqib Talib from Denver. They also signed the Chiefs. They also signed Anthony Hitchens, linebacker Anthony Hitchens from the Dallas Cowboys, to a 5-year deal after they released another Penn State guy. A lot of Penn State guys either retiring or getting released or signing somewhere. They signed Hitchens to a 5-year deal because they released longtime Chief, who's played his whole career in Kansas City, Tom Bahali. But that's not all for the Chiefs. They got Mahomes a number 1 wide receiver. They brought in wide receiver Sammy Watkins, who the Rams decided not to re-sign, and they signed him to a 3-year deal. So a young quarterback, a new quarterback because he's never played it down in the NFL, a young running back in Kareem Hunt, who had a great rookie year, went off against the Patriots, rookie out of Toledo, 3rd-round pick. Last year's running back rookie class was good, and they're saying this year's rookie class for running back is gonna, be good as well. So, a couple years from now, we'll have to go back and, compare the two and see see what year won between 2017 draft and 2018 draft. A new number 1 wide receiver in Sammy Watkins, and somewhat a revamped defense, bringing in Hitchens and Kendall Fuller, who's a young cornerback, and it doesn't cost as much as Marcus Peters. But we'll have to see. The AFC West, excuse me, not the NFC West, the AFC West, it's getting tougher and tougher. The Chiefs and the Broncos a couple years ago were the number 2 teams, the top 2 teams, but now the Raiders look to be coming back, and the LA Chargers came on strong late in the year last year, so we'll have to see what happens. The AFC West might be, if not the best, one of the best divisions in the NFL. Before I do talk about both LA teams, the Chargers and the Rams, I want to take a pause for the cause and make sure, like I said earlier in the show, if you haven't done so already, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe right here on YouTube. Links are in the description below. My Twitter and Instagram links are also in the description below. And then questions of the day are out there, so be sure to go vote on those. The Chargers really haven't done a whole lot. They re-signed their cornerback Casey Hayward to a 3-year deal, who's been who's had a big part in their defense, and hopefully he doesn't get hurt. Hopefully a lot of these players don't get hurt, I'll say that, because you see these guys either coming over from a different team or re-signing. They'll sign a big deal, get hurt in the first year, and the team will be screwed, and then in the second or third year they'll be trying to rework that deal to try to save some money, because a couple years from now there might be something better either in free agency or in the draft that they could go out and get, and then get rid of that guy. But it's the NFL. It's a business. But the Chargers, like I said, they brought back Casey Hayward, been a key part of that defense, and hopefully the Chargers, I'd like to see the Chargers in the playoffs. They were close last year. Hopefully they can play good football all year long, unlike they did last year when they only played good, about halfway through the year they decided to start playing, and then it was a little bit too late. But we'll have to see what happens. They haven't been in the playoffs since 2013, so like I said, we'll have to see. The other team in LA, the Los Angeles Rams, I think I'm getting used to the Rams and the Chargers being in Los Angeles. I haven't said San Diego Chargers up until now, like I just did, but and I haven't said St. Louis Rams in a while, like I just did though. But the Rams, they traded for cornerbacks Aqib Talib, Marcus Peters from the Broncos and the Chiefs, and they also traded two of their linebackers, Robert Quinn and Alec Ogletree, to the Dolphins and Giants respectively. So long story short, for the Rams, I'd say the Rams, beat the Chargers in a battle of the LA teams in free agency in the off season so far. You still got the draft though. We'll have to see how they pick. But long story short, the Rams evened out their defense. They got rid of two linebackers that we're gonna want money sometime, and they bring in two cornerbacks who really you can plug in and play right away because they're really, really good players in the NFC West. That now Sam Bradford's going to be thrown all over your defense. Jimmy Garoppolo, one of the hottest, youngest NFL quarterbacks at the moment, one of the best young quarterbacks at the moment. And, you still got Russell Wilson up in Seattle. So, and then you got Jared Goff, who hopefully can, play like he did this past year and, win the Rams some more games and go back to the playoffs. So they evened out their defense and saved some money and acquired some draft picks. So I like what the Rams have done. And like I said, I think they beat the Chargers up to this point in the battle of both Los Angeles teams. The Miami Dolphins then will go to South Florida. They're continuing with their stupid ways, I think. But in the end, it all came back around. I think they did all right because they hold the number 11 overall pick in this year's draft, and they could trade up. They could, trade back a little bit if they don't like, who's sitting there at 11. We'll have to see come draft night. But I think it all started whenever they traded this time around, when they traded Jay Ajayi to Philadelphia, who ended up winning a Super Bowl. And then they ended up trading Jarvis Landry to the Browns. Ryan Tannehill's coming back. I understand you had to sign Jay Cutler to replace him because he blew his knee out in the preseason, or it wasn't in the preseason, it was before the preseason started, it was in practice. But then they did good, I thought, by releasing some big name veterans who were going to want money sometime as well. They released Lawrence Timmons and Ndamukong Suh, Julius Thomas and Mike Pouncey, who they drafted in the first round a couple years ago. And Ndamukong Suh, they should have never signed him, but they did. And now he's looking to go somewhere, and he's even said, whoever's going to pay him the most money. Well, if that's what he wants, that's what he's going to get more than likely. Or, he's going to be without a job. We'll have to see what happens. I don't know if a team would want to, especially halfway through his career, want to give him a long-term deal worth a lot of money. Because, he did work out Miami a little bit, but he wasn't as good as what he was in Detroit. But like I said, I don't think the Dolphins should ever sign him, but they did. And now, they're eating some of that money that they still owe him. They did, however, like I said, they got Robert Quinn from the LA Rams in the trade. They signed wide receiver Albert Wilson in free agency from the Kansas City Chiefs. They signed him to a 3-year deal. They also signed wide receiver Danny Amendola from the New England Patriots. And they brought in guard Josh Sitton from the Chicago Bears after 1 year, because he didn't really work out in Chicago after signing with them after Green Bay got rid of him. And then they also made a late trade that I inserted before I started, and they got center Daniel Kilgore, who the 49ers had re-signed before they traded him. So they got Kilgore now for the next 3 to 4 years from the 49ers to replace Mike Pouncey at center. So like I said, in the end, I guess it did work out. But, this is on paper. You got to be able to, put it all together on the field and win football games. So we'll have to see what happens. Now to the Minnesota Vikings. I know a lot of people have probably been waiting for this. The Vikings didn't do a whole lot. They did bring in Sheldon Richardson, a defense tackle from Seattle. on a deal. I believe it was a 1-year deal, might be 2 years, to plug in and play on the defensive line. But they really didn't have a whole lot of money to go out and sign a lot of other guys because, well, they gave Kirk Cousins a fully guaranteed 3-year, $84 million contract. Fully guaranteed. First time ever in NFL history for a quarterback that their contract with signing with a new team is fully guaranteed. So whether or not he plays all 3 years in Minnesota, he's still going to be making $84 million from the Minnesota Vikings. And more than likely he will play all 3 years, but, say he gets hurt after the first year or after the second year. Vikings want to get out of it, they're still going to have to pay him $84 million or find somebody who, bearing any injuries, like I said, if he blows his knee out, no team's probably going to want him. But they're going to have to find somebody then to, take on the money if they want to get rid of him. And like I said, they lost all 3 quarterbacks from last year. Bradford, Bridgewater, and Case Keenum. They signed Kirk Cousins, so he'll be the number 1 guy. Still got Dalvin Cook at running back, who they drafted in the first round last year. Blew his knee out at home. I forget who they were playing. Middle of the season, early in the season there. So he's coming back at running back. They still got good wide receiving core. Defense is still solid. Hell, they were 1 game away from going to the Super Bowl last year in their own home stadium. They lost to the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship game. So you add Kirk Cousins now. We'll have to see if it gets them over the top. And then they also brought in Trevor Siemian. Like I said, they traded with the Broncos to get Siemian, so Siemian can come in and back up Kirk Cousins. The one team that was in the playoffs last year, the team that lost in the Super Bowl, the New England Patriots, they lost Dion Lewis, Malcolm Butler, Danny Amendola, Johnson Betamosi to Houston, and Nate Solder. I'll get to him in a minute. And I'll get to Dion Lewis and Malcolm Butler in a minute as well. In this year's free agency, period. After appearing in back-to-back Super Bowls. But you go back to last year in free agency, they also lost a lot of guys off of that team. They lost LeGarrette Blount. He went to Philly. Now he's in Detroit. He just left Philly. They lost Chris Long to Philly as well. He's still there, along with some other guys. But look where that ended up getting the Patriots back in the Super Bowl. So don't panic, Patriots fans, supporters, whatever the hell you call yourself. The Patriots will be fine. Bill Belichick will bring in some players, that he believes, will be, right with the Patriots and, win games the Patriot way. And brought back running backs from last year, Rex Burkhead and Brandon Bolden. And they also traded, as I said, for Danny Shelton and Jason McCourty from the Browns. And then they last night signed Adrian Claiborne from the Atlanta Falcons on a 3-year deal, I believe that was. So Claiborne coming to the team that beat his squad 2 years ago in Super Bowl 51. And then they also brought in another running back who will more than likely be the number 1, in my opinion, should be the number 1. But, the Patriots and their running backs and their wide receivers, every single position, you think one guy's the number 1 guy, he might be 4 or 5 because there's some no-name that Belichick brought in and, he's playing 10 times better. But they signed Jeremy Hill from the Cincinnati Bengals, former second-round pick out of LSU. So, Patriots, no need to worry. They'll be back in the playoffs next year. Bearing any injury from Tom Brady, he'll be 41 at the start of the season. The New Orleans Saints then, the Saints, along with the Vikings, were in the playoffs. They were 1 play away from going to the NFC Championship game. They played the Vikings. They lost on the Minneapolis Miracle, if you remember that. So why fix the team if it's not broken? They did re-sign their quarterback, Drew Brees. I don't know if you heard of him. Future first ballot Hall of Famer, to a 2-year, $50 million deal with $27 million guaranteed. And then they also added 2 pieces to the defense. Brought in safety Kurt Coleman and linebacker Demario Davis. Breeze could have went somewhere in free agency. He could have got more money than Cousins. Wouldn't have been fully guaranteed, I'll tell you that. But he could have got more money than Kirk Cousins. But I believe he re-signed with the New Orleans Saints because he wants to get one more Super Bowl ring before he retires, before he becomes a first ballot Hall of Famer. And you know, when he does, after his career is over, you know, he'll go down as one of the best. You know, long story short, I don't really know where I was going with that, but the Giants and the Jets are next, both teams that have New York names but play in New Jersey. The Giants, they added to a very talented team from last year, even though they went 3-13. They got a new head coach after they fired Ben McAdoo halfway through the year. They bring over Pat Shurmur, the offensive coordinator from the Minnesota Vikings. Has been a head coach before for the Cleveland Browns, but he was the head coach for the Browns, so we all know how that ended. He ended up getting fired. But they still have Eli Manning at quarterback, Odell Beckham Jr. at wide receiver, Sterling Shepard at wide receiver as well, a young wide receiver that I really, really like. Evan Ingram at tight end. Jason Pierre-Paul, who's getting up there in age on the defense, plays with, you know, one whole hand and then 3 or 4 fingers, maybe 2 on the other hand because he blew his hand off with fireworks a couple years ago. And they also brought back Eli Apple, who really has been up and down in his career so far, and Landon Collins, who's been solid coming out of Alabama a couple years ago, along with Alec Ogletree, who they traded with the Rams for. And then they signed running back Jonathan Stewart to fill their running back hole that they, you know, really, really needed the past 2-3 years. They really haven't had a good running back in a while. And then they brought in Nate Solder to block for Eli and Jonathan Stewart. And then, you know, if they bring in another running back, which more than likely they will before the season starts, I think the Giants are going to make the playoffs next year. They'll be the one team that, shouldn't say is going to surprise, but they'll be, what's the word I want to use? I want to surprise. They'll get back in the yeah, see, I don't know what the word I want to use. I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants are in the playoffs next year, but like I said, they wouldn't be a surprise even though they went 3-13 last year. I'm just going to move on because I can't think of the word. But they bring in Nate Solder to block, and then they also have the number 2 overall pick in the draft this year. And, you know, bearing what the Browns do at 1, you know, they'll basically have their pick of who they want to pick because they finished 3-13 last year. When you finish 3-13, you get a top pick in the draft, plain and simple. You know, they could take the future quarterback, Eli, who knows how much longer he'll be playing, and who knows the next time they'll be at the top of the draft. They could take, you know, the best offensive lineman, Quentin Nelson, out of Notre Dame. They could take the best defensive lineman, Bradley Chubb, out of NC State, or they could take the most polarizing running back since Bo Jackson, and that's Saquon Barkley from right here at Penn State. We'll have to see, though. Like I said, it's gonna go through the Browns first at 1, unless the Giants trade up and get the number 1 overall pick and take Saquon at 1. I just hope to God Saquon Barkley does not go to Cleveland Browns because his career will be over before it begins. The other team that has a New York name and plays in New Jersey, the Jets. I honestly don't know where to start with the Jets. I'll just say that Matt Forte retired, so they signed Isaiah Corral to replace him. Like I said, they just traded up from 6 to 3. They cost them 3 second rounders, and then they got the Colts got the number 6 pick now. And then they brought back Tremaine Johnson after he played last year, played elsewhere last year. And then they brought in linebackers Avery Williamson from Tennessee to also help out the defense that really, really needs a lot of help. The whole team needs help, including the coaching staff, the front office execs, hell, the people that work in the stadium during Jets games. They need help. But on the offensive side, they brought in center Spencer Long, quarterback Teddy Bridgewater. So Bridgewater leaves Minnesota to go to the Jets now, and they also brought back Josh McCown to either start or back up Bridgewater. And right now, it's probably Teddy's job to lose because McCown has, experience in this offense with Todd Bowles as head coach. But, we'll have to see. I think come week 1, though, it's going to be Teddy and the Jets. I think it's going to be Bridgewater's job. Let me know who you think will be the New York Jets quarterback at the beginning of the season. The Oakland Raiders then are next. We got a couple more teams left. The Oakland Raiders, they're going back to their old school ways. John Gruden's back as head coach, was the head coach for the Raiders from 98 to 2002. Led them to the playoffs, I believe, almost every year. Then they traded him to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ended up beating his former squad in the Super Bowl the next year. That was Super Bowl 37, first Super Bowl I ever watched. Or remember watching, for that matter. But yeah, I think they're going old school now, bringing Gruden back. They brought in I shouldn't say washed up running back, but a running back who his good years are probably behind him because he's been injured a little bit, but he's still capable of producing some really, really good numbers, and that's Doug Martin, who they signed from Tampa Bay, not arguably from Tampa Bay, from Tampa Bay, to help out with Marshawn Lynch. And, who knows? Doug Martin could be the number one guy in Oakland if Marshawn Lynch decides not to come back. Because, who knows what Marshawn Lynch is going to do. Marshawn's going to be Marshawn, plain and simple, when it comes down to it. He, might say he doesn't want to play again, wants to retire, and then a couple years he might want to come back. I don't know. No one knows. Only Marshawn Lynch knows. It'd be nice to see a two-headed backfield with the Oakland Raiders, with Marshawn Lynch and Doug Martin. Like I said, they did release Michael Crabtree, signed with the Ravens, but then they brought in Jordy Nelson to replace him. So I think that's a huge upgrade. Even though Crabtree was a former first-round pick, Nelson's had the better NFL career. The Raiders now have Derek Carr quarterback. Just look at their offense. Derek Carr quarterback, Marshawn Lynch and Doug Martin running back, Amari Cooper and Jordy Nelson at wide receiver, and Jared Cook at tight end. You got a good offensive line. They could arguably have the best offense in the NFL. Do you think they have the best offense in the NFL? Let me know down in the comments below. Now, only if they can get that defense figured out. They still got Khalil Mack, Bruce Irvin, and Carl Joseph from West Virginia. If they can get that defense figured out, the Oakland Raiders and soon-to-be Las Vegas Raiders might be in and winning Super Bowls before we know it. Hell, I had them playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and winning the Super Bowl last year, but that did not happen as both teams missed out on the playoffs. Speaking of the Super Bowl, though, the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles are going to look a little bit different on defense next year after they decided to release Vinny Curry on the defensive line after they weren't able to come to terms on a new deal. But before that, they traded for Michael Bennett, the defensive end from the Seattle Seahawks. So Bennett will be taking Vinny Curry's spot. They also released tight end Brent Selleck, who's played most of his career, if not all of his career, in Philadelphia. And then they traded Torrey Smith on offense as well. So I guess both sides of the ball, including special teams, punter Donnie Jones decided to retire. The Eagles are going to look a lot different next year, and we'll have to see if they can get back to the playoffs, because normally Super Bowl champions do not make the playoffs next year after winning it. But they did get cornerback Darryl Worley from Carolina, as I said earlier. So we'll have to see how he plays out in Philadelphia. But you got to play the games. If they, especially with Carson Wentz coming back, they still got Nick Foles. There's questions there at quarterback. Who's going to start? Wentz coming back from ACL. Foles led the Eagles to the Super Bowl and won them the Super Bowl and won the MVP. We'll have to see. And the Eagles, well, they did sign. They got another key piece to that defensive line. I threw it in here late as well. They brought in Haloti Ngata from Detroit. Played his best ball in Baltimore, and then signed with the Lions a couple years ago. But the Eagles will look to become the first team since the 2004 New England Patriots to win back-to-back Super Bowls. The most recent team that's almost done it would have been the Seahawks, but then they lost to the Patriots in Super Bowl 49 after beating the Broncos in Super Bowl 48. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens. All right, I got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more teams to do. Try to hurry it up here. Thank you for continuing to watch. I know I've been going on a very, very long time today. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they really haven't done anything in free agency, and they normally don't. It's become the norm in the Berg in recent years, so I'm not really surprised they haven't signed any big-name guys. They've been trying to build their team through the draft in recent years, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of teams do that. The Cowboys and the Steelers are probably the two teams that have done it the most in recent years, and a lot of teams I think are trying to look at that and see how they can do the same thing. But they did release 3 members of the secondary. Mike Mitchell, who they signed from Carolina a couple years ago, getting older, wants too much money, get rid of him. Robert Golden, and then William Gay as well. William Gay is the last member of the Super Bowl 43 squad that was still left on the Pittsburgh Steelers. But then they did re-sign fullback Roosevelt Nix, who hopefully will be blocking for Le'Veon Bell at running back after they place the franchise tag on Le'Veon Bell for the second straight year. Hopefully they can get a long-term deal done before July the 16th. And then they re-signed kicker Chris Boswell to a 1-year deal. Go out west a little bit, the San Francisco 49ers, they've spent a shit ton of money so far. They re-signed Jimmy Garoppolo, who they got in a trade with New England last year at the trade deadline. Re-signed him, I believe, for 5 years. They signed Richard Sherman after he was cut from the Seattle Seahawks. And then they signed Jerick McKinnon from the Minnesota Vikings. So they get arguably the best, at the time, the best backup, but probably the best young quarterback in the NFL, Jimmy Garoppolo. And then they get two great players from NFC rivals in Seattle and Minnesota with Richard Sherman and Jerick McKinnon. 3 players, total deals, a little upwards of $200 million. So, doesn't work out. A lot of money just got poured down the drain. The Seattle Seahawks then stay in the NFC West. They're doing the same things the Rams have done so far, I believe. And that's, evening out the defense. They traded Michael Bennett, released Richard Sherman. They released Jeremy Lane, too, I believe. So, basically, everybody from the Legion of Boom is gone. Earl Thomas is still there. They're trying to work out a deal with him. But Seattle, they weren't lucky enough for both Bennett and Sherman to land in the AFC. They both went to NFC teams. So if the Seahawks want to get back to the Super Bowl and they have to play the Philadelphia Eagles or the San Francisco 49ers, they're going to have to go through 2 former players that they've had on their team that they decided to get rid of. But as I said, they've been doing somewhat similar to what the Rams have done, I thought, but they didn't bring in as big of pieces. Remember, the Rams brought in Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters. The the Seahawks also lost Jimmy Graham too, by the way. I don't have that in here because I talked about it when I talked about the Green Bay Packers. But the Seahawks brought in tight end Ed Dixon to replace Jimmy Graham then. Not even going to be close. And then they brought in, who else did they bring in? Oh, they brought in Barkevious Mingo, former first-round pick out of LSU to the Browns a couple years ago, to replace Michael Bennett. Not even close either in comparison. We'll have to see how it works out. They did save money. They'll build their team through the draft. We'll have to see what happens. The Seahawks, they've been making some stupid decisions in recent years, drafting and signing the wrong players, and you know they've lost in the playoffs for 3 straight years now, and we're one play away from winning back-to-back Super Bowls, and they should have ran the ball. They always go back to the Seahawks should have ran the ball at the 1-yard line in Super Bowl 49 with Marshawn Lynch against the New England Patriots, but they decided to throw. Malcolm Butler, who ended up signing with the Titans, I'll get to him in a minute, intercepted them. The New England Patriots won Super Bowl 49. Tampa Bay Buccaneers stay in the NFC. They locked up 2 weapons for Jameis Winston. They re-signed tight end Cameron Brate and wide receiver Mike Evans to. Mike Evans got a 5-year deal and Brate got a 6-year deal. Worth a lot of money as well. A lot of teams are spending a lot of money, but obviously it's going to be dished out over several years. Then they also added to their defense by bringing former Wisconsin Badger and current Super Bowl champion defensive tackle Bo Allen to Tampa Bay from Philadelphia. And like I said, they let Doug Martin walk, and he signed with the Raiders. So, and I talked about the draft class, the running back draft class this year. More than likely, the Bucs will draft a running back early in the draft. I would not be surprised if either Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Oakland Raiders trade up to try to draft Saquon Barkley as well. Because Gruden probably knows Marshawn Lynch and Doug Martin don't have a whole lot of time left. Because once running backs get to age 30, their careers normally, drift off. I think Martin is 30. They only signed him to a 1-year deal, so that's only for this year. Who knows what Marshawn Lynch is going to do? Like I said, Marshawn's going to be Marshawn. You're moving to Vegas. You bring into that offense another terrific piece in Saquon Barkley. Going back to, like I said, Bo Jackson. I'd like to see I'd really like to see Saquon in New York with the Giants, because he's there at 2. It'll obviously cost the Bucs and the Raiders some picks and probably some players to get Saquon. But they both hold top 10 picks, so anything's possible. Hell, anything's possible. March Madness going on right now. Last night, a 16 seed beat a number 1 seed for the first time ever in NCAA tournament history. Probably the biggest upset in college basketball history. Probably basketball history, comparing college and the NBA. It was, and they didn't beat them by a couple. They blew them out. They beat them by 20. The University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, defeated Virginia by 20 in the NCAA tournament. And they were 16 seed. They defeated a 1, so anything's possible. Who knows what's going to happen the rest of free agency and, during the NFL draft this year. 2 teams left, the Tennessee Titans and the Washington Redskins. The Tennessee Titans, they brought back Daquan Jones on a 3-year deal, along with kicker Ryan Suckup, who they re-signed to a 5-year deal. So, same kicker, and keeping to that defense, they brought in Malcolm Butler, who basically won the Patriots Super Bowl 49, as I said, against the Seahawks a couple years ago. And then they brought in Dion Lewis as well from New England to help out Derrick Henry with the running game, as they decided to release DeMarco Murray. So Murray's still out there. Whoever's looking at a running back, maybe he goes to Tampa Bay. Murray would fit good, I think, in Tampa Bay's offense with Jameis Mike Evans. But we'll have to see what Dirk Cutter and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers decide to do. So, other than that, one team left, the Washington Redskins. I talked about it already. They traded for Alex Smith, weren't going to be able to re-sign Kirk Cousins, who ended up signing a fully guaranteed contract with the Minnesota Vikings. And then they signed wide receiver Paul Richardson away from the Seattle Seahawks. I believe a 5-year deal, might be a 4-year deal. So he'll be the number one guy wide receiver at the moment in Washington, because Terrell Pryor really didn't have as good a year as what he thought. He bet on himself. Didn't win. Kirk Cousins also bet on himself. He did win, though. Got a fully guaranteed contract worth $84 million with the Minnesota Vikings. But, you know, we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens. You know, like I said, free agency, it's going to be from now up until the season starts and even during the season. But we got the next big thing during the NFL offseason is the draft. That's at the end of April. So that's probably the next time you'll see me for football. I'll have some wrestling videos coming in the future, next couple weeks, going to a couple more events, WWE, just live events. I think live events are, in my opinion, a little bit better than TV tapings, because you'll see the guys do stuff that they won't be allowed to do on TV. And I've been to a lot in the past 2 years, because for the first time in a while, they've been, it seems like back to back, they've been coming to the area, and there's videos on the Facebook page, and now I try to, there's videos from 2 events, from a SmackDown Live event in September of 2016 and from a Raw Live event in January of 2017 on the Facebook page, along with the start of the NASCAR race that I attended last year. But everything else I've been putting on YouTube, and including some concerts that I've been to, and events, Penn State game and whatnot. So, yeah, and then I went to NXT, SmackDown, Raw. They're bringing SmackDown back again, and NXT's coming back as well. So videos from that will be within the next month and a half. I'll have videos, hopefully full matches as well from both those events, and WrestleMania and NXT TakeOver predictions. Before WrestleMania, obviously, and then after that, probably be my next NFL video, circling back to that, when I'll have my NFL draft predictions. So I just want to say thanks for watching. It's really appreciated. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, be sure to follow and subscribe. You know, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Right here on YouTube. A lot of videos, and a lot more videos to come. Like I said, hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see everybody later.